Well, hello again, and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Christian Science Monitor. This is PM, and here is your first article. Keep working from home, how office life will change after COVID-19. Businesses are considering new safety measures for communal workplaces, how to improve online collaborations, and if they need a physical location at all, by Kelvin Chan. Office jobs are never going to be the same. When workers around the world eventually return to their desks, they'll find many changes due to the pandemic. For a start, fewer people will go back to their offices as the coronavirus crisis makes working from home more acceptable. Health concerns linger, and companies weigh up rent savings and productivity benefits. For the rest, changes will begin with the commute as workers arrive in staggered shifts to avoid rush hour crowds. Staff might take turns working alternate days in the office to reduce crowding. Floor markings or digital sensors could remind people to stand apart, and cubicles might even make a comeback. This is going to be a catalyst for things that people were too scared to do before, says John Furneaux, CEO of Hive, a New York City-based workplace software startup. The pandemic gives added impetus to allow us and others to make changes to century-old work practices. Hive plans to help employees avoid packed rush hour subway commutes by starting at different hours, says Mr. Furneaux, who thinks he has had the virus. In Britain, the government is considering asking employees to do the same. At bigger companies, senior executives are rethinking cramming downtown office towers with workers. British bank Barclays is making a long-term adjustment in how we think about our location strategy, CEO Jess Staley said. The notion of putting 7,000 people in a building may be a thing of the past. That is already happening in China, where lockdowns started easing in March. Beijing municipal authorities limited the number of people in each office to no more than 50% of usual staffing levels, required office workers to wear face masks, and sit at least 3.3 feet apart. At a minimum, the COVID-19 crisis could be the death knell for some recent polarized office trends, such as the shared workspaces used by many tech startups to create a more casual and creative environment. Cubicles and partitions are making a return as the virus speeds the move away from open-plan office spaces, architects say. Design firm Bergmeyer is reinstalling dividers on 85 desks at its Boston office that had been removed over the years. That will return a greater degree of privacy to the individual desks, in addition to the physical barrier which this health crisis now warrants, says Vice President Rachel Zemberry. There's no rush to return. At Google and Facebook, employees will be able to work remotely until the end of the year. Other firms have realized they don't even need an office. Executives at San Francisco teamwork startup Range had given notice on their office because they wanted someplace bigger. But when California's shelter-in-place order was issued, they instead scrapped their search and decided to go all remote indefinitely, a move that would save 6 figures on rent. We were looking at the writing on the wall, says co-founder Jennifer Denard. One upside of having an all-remote workforce is that the company can hire from a broader pool of candidates beyond San Francisco, where astronomical housing costs have priced out many. But Ms. Denard said the downside is that it eliminates the chaotic interruptions, the chance encounters between staff members that can spark creativity. So the company is planning more online collaboration to let this happen. Good Brothers Digital, a public relations firm in Wales, also ditched its office space in downtown Cardiff. Director Martin John said productivity is just as high as it was before the pandemic forced them to work from home, so he decided to give up the company's office space to save on rent, one of his biggest expenses. Why drag employees into the office if they're happier working from home, he reasons. People are just going to expect it now. The work from home trend will continue accelerating even after the pandemic ends, according to consultancy Gartner. After the pandemic, 41% of employees expect to work remotely at least some of the time, up from 30% before the outbreak, according to 220 human resources executives it surveyed. Not all companies can go fully remote, especially big corporations with thousands of staff. Even so, they're thinking carefully about who should return to the office and who can and should continue to work from home. At Dell, more people are going to work from home, but we're still going to need offices because some jobs are best done there, said Chief Digital Officer Jen Felch. She cited customer support staff who can access more resources at the office to diagnose equipment problems. More than 90% of Dell's 165,000 full-time global staff are working remotely during the pandemic, compared with 30% before it started. Once lockdown ends, she estimates that number will be above 50%. The outbreak is also going to force companies to take hygiene much more seriously. The amount of people cleaning and sanitizing an office is going to shoot through the roof, says Brian Croft, Gartner's Chief of Human Resources Research. Extra attention will go to places like conference rooms, which will have to be cleaned between uses, bringing added disruption, he said, or companies could do away with in-person meetings altogether. What's the point of sanitizing everybody's desk if you're getting them all in the same room, says Hive, Mr. Furneaux, who said he's thinking carefully about how to hold events such as all-hands meetings for his 70 staff. We might get the weird scenario of in-office conference calls. High-tech solutions will play a role, such as sensors to remind people to maintain social distancing, said Joanna Daly, Vice President for Corporate Health and Safety at IBM. Existing industrial sensor technology could easily be adapted to offices, says Ms. Daly. One possible example? We'd want our phones to buzz if we got closer than 2 meters or 6 feet while we're having a conversation, she said. And moving on to our next article, a poll. Most Americans disapprove of anti-lockdown protests. A new survey released by the Center for Public Affairs Research found that 55% of Americans disapprove of anti-quarantine protests. Democrats are more likely than Republicans to disapprove of such a protest. By Randall Chase and Emily Swanson. A majority of Americans disapprove of protests against restrictions aimed at preventing the spread of the coronavirus, according to a new poll that also finds the still expansive support for such limits, including restaurant closures and stay-at-home orders, has dipped in recent weeks. The new survey from the University of Chicago Divinity School and the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs research finds 55% of Americans disapprove of the protests that have been popped up in some states as some Americans begin chafing at public health measures that have disseminated the global economy. 31% approve of the demonstrations. Texas hair salon owner Shelley Luther was sentenced to 7 days in jail last week after refusing to apologize to a judge for opening her salon in defiance of Republican Governor Greg Abbott's emergency orders. She was released less than 48 hours later after Governor Abbott removed jail as a punishment for defying virus safeguards. In Michigan, thousands of people rallied outside the state capitol last month to protest Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer's restrictions. Hundreds returned 2 weeks later, some of them armed, to demonstrate inside the State House. Democrats are more likely than Republicans to disapprove of such protests, 67% to 51%. 32% of Republicans and 25% of Democrats say they do approve. Only 8% said public protests, marches, and rallies should be unrestricted during the outbreak, while 41% think they should be allowed only with restrictions, and 50% think they should not be allowed at all. Dee Minor of Fremont, California, said she disapproves of the protests, but also feels people have the right to express themselves. We have the right to protest, but I have to tell you, seeing those people with those weapons at the State House in Michigan was pretty disturbing, says Miss Minor, a Democrat and retired dental office manager. I felt sorry for the legislators having to work with that angry mob in the lobby. It seems like it was just pure intimidation. Adam Bland of Carson City, Nevada, says he does not personally favor the protests, but does not believe they should be restricted. It's a tough situation, says Mr. Bland, a Republican-leaning voter who works in the natural gas industry. But I also think that one of the reasons we live in a great country is that we have freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom to protest. As some states have begun to slowly ease restrictions on businesses and individuals, the poll finds that 71% of Americans favor requiring people to stay in their homes except for essential errands. Support for such measures is down slightly from 80% to 2 weeks earlier. Similarly, 67% of Americans now say they favor requiring bars and restaurants to close, down from 76% in the earlier poll. The poll also suggests dipping support for requiring Americans to limit gatherings to 10 people or fewer, from 82% to 75%, and requiring postponement of non-essential medical care from 68% to 57%. Mark Roberts, a retired transportation worker in Abington, Virginia, said he's going about his business despite Governor Ralph Northam's stay-at-home order. Mr. Roberts said people in his southwestern Virginia community are driving the short distance into neighboring Bristol, Tennessee to patronize restaurants that are open there. People from Virginia have been crossing over into Tennessee to eat and just get out, and do things. And Virginia is losing out on it, said the Republican. Among Republicans like Mr. Roberts, they share supporting stay-at-home orders dipped from 70% in late April to 57% in the latest poll. The share supporting other measures also dropped from 75% to 63% for limiting gatherings to no more than 10 people, and from 70% to 53% for closing bars and restaurants. Among Democrats, 84% favor staying-at-home orders, which is down slightly from 91% in the earlier polls. 87% of the Democrats favor barring gatherings of more than 10 people, and 79% support bar and restaurant closures, about the same as in the previous poll. Mr. Bland, the Nevada resident, said he didn't mind officials imposing certain restrictions for a short period of time, but fears the potential of authorities being unwilling to roll back some of their newly declared powers. I do think the government should respond to allowing people to make more of their own personal choices without legal repercussions, said Mr. Bland, who says he doesn't expect to find himself in a crowded bar anytime soon, but is looking forward to being able to go back to church. The poll found most Americans in favor of some kind of restriction on in-person worship, with 42% saying that should be allowed with restrictions and 48% that it should not be allowed at all. Mary Lou Granger, a retired nurse anesthetist and registered Republican in Washington, Missouri, said she's torn between the need to take precautions against the virus while also allowing people to make their own decisions. I think we should still be under a bit of a quarantine, especially people who are 60 or older, said Granger, who believes the jury is still out on whether lockdowns and stay-at-home orders have been effective in stemming the spread of the virus. Did we make a mistake? Did we totally annihilate our economy? Or did we actually save some people issuing this quarantine? She asked. As a note to the readers, the AP NORC poll of 1,002 adults was conducted April 30th to May 4th, using a sample drawn from NORC's probability-based America Speak panel, which is designated to be a representative of the U.S. population. The margin of sampling errors for all respondents is plus or minus 4.2 percentage points. Well, ending that article and moving on, is this crisis giving capitalism a moral judge? Many corporations are boosting pay or health protections for workers in the pandemic, or are facing criticism if they don't. By Laurent Belsey. Stories keep rolling in of corporate good deeds in the midst of the coronavirus. Carhartt, the clothing maker known for its sturdy work pants, has redirected factories in Kentucky and Tennessee to produce gowns and masks for medical workers. Shoe company Allbirds of San Francisco, which brands itself around low environmental impact, has donated $500,000 in footwear as part of an effort to lift up our healthcare community. In Baltimore, Steel basket manufacturer Marlin Steel got an order one Friday evening in March to make test tube holders for companies testing patients for COVID-19, a product it's never made before. Employees volunteered to work the weekend to design and build them. Then, due to a canceled airline flight, 2 Marlin employees drove more than 1,000 miles overnight to deliver them to the first client by Monday morning. Such examples of corporations helping a broader community are spurring hopes among some that the coronavirus can hasten a shift, even if the steps may be modest and gradual, towards a more benevolent capitalism. The latest signs of movement aren't limited to the United States. The company Allbirds has roots in New Zealand as well as the U.S., and the coronavirus has prompted companies around the world to make moves beyond the interests of their shareholders. I feel like we're in a musical chairs moment, says Shelley Alpern, Director of Shareholder Advocacy at ReaVentures, a social investment and advocacy firm based in San Francisco. When the self-quarantine phase is over, it's basically like the music stops and we see where the economy has landed. It's an amazing opportunity that's coming up before us. It's whether the government and civil society, with the aid of companies, can help to re-envision the future and design an economy where the rewards are more broadly distributed for workers and we're all in a far more resilient place. Of course, a quest for shareholder profits and an often charitable spirit have long coexisted in capitalist economies, and for now, legions of businesses are focused more on survival than on do-goodism. But even before the pandemic, leaders of many large corporations were already acknowledging public pressure to shift towards a stakeholder model of corporate purpose with a stronger emphasis on societal and worker interests as well as profits. And times of crisis, historically, can add momentum to existing trends. Economic shocks tend to accelerate the pace of structural change, says Neil Gregory, Chief Thought Leadership Officer of the International Finance Corporation, the private investment arm of the World Bank Group. Thus, corporate moves already underway towards greener, more sustainable operations, as well as wider use of online services, should speed up, he adds. One of the biggest challenges now facing businesses is massive layoffs. The Labor Department reported Friday that 20.5 million Americans lost their jobs last month, causing unemployment to soar to 14.7%, a level not seen since the Great Depression. Some companies have tried to soften the blow by allowing workers to hang on to their health care benefits. Gravity Payments, a credit card processor in Seattle that won plaudits 5 years ago for raising workers' minimum pay to $70,000 a year, found a different solution. Losing $1 million a month, the CEO turned his employees for cost-cutting ideas, and within a day they had them, including workers volunteering to take temporary pay cuts. The CEO and chief operating officers were so impressed they cut their own salaries to zero, doubling the amount of time the company can continue to operate before running out of cash and having to lay off workers. Workers are the number one stakeholder. The pandemic has also shined a bright light on weaknesses of contemporary capitalism. Any lasting changes in CEO thinking may end up being spurred most heavily from outside the boardroom by workers and watchdog groups or consumers and socially conscious investors. Will the pandemic really force social change? I wouldn't say I'm optimistic, says Ms. Alpern of ReaVentures. Yet she adds, what does give me some optimism is that I think there is rising awareness of how vulnerable so many people in certain sectors of the economy are. The economy's reliance on low-paid, often part-time employees has suddenly become more starkly visible, as truck drivers and grocery clerks have become frontline workers in the battle to keep households supplied while citizens are largely sheltering in their homes. Workers are the number one stakeholder in this particular instance, says Julie Gorte, Senior Vice President for Sustainable Investment at Impacts Asset Management. It's so easy to expose your workers to the potential for infection. Individually, many companies have stepped up to the plate to help out these workers. Large chains such as Walmart, Target, Kroger, and Albertson have increased pay temporarily. CVS and Trader Joe's have handed out bonuses. Even many firms that weren't seeing a surge in business have acted to help their lowest paid employees. Restaurant chain Chipotle raised hourly pay 10% and handed out first quarter bonuses. Darden Restaurants, the owner of Olive Garden and Longhorn Steakhouse chains, extended paid sick leave to all its hourly employees. It's not always clear when companies are acting from high ethical standards and when they're simply trying to avoid bad publicity. Seattle-based Amazon has won praise for stepping up its operation and hiring 175,000 new workers to keep consumers supplied with goods when so many stores are closed. But the result is also extra market share in a now shrinking economy. And Amazon workers have held public protest at several locations, including at its Whole Food division, complaining the company hasn't done enough to protect them. So last week, when announcing first quarter earnings, executive told shareholders to take a seat in case of shock because the company planned to devote all its expected $4 billion second quarter profit to pandemic-related activities. The action will include protective equipment for all workers, stepped up cleaning and monitoring, and the building of a facility for its own coronavirus testing. Even so, Amazon's public image took another hit this week when Vice President Tim Bray resigned, citing the firing of employee whistleblowers on safety concerns. Actions under public scrutiny. Bad press has dogged some corporations and perhaps prompted corrective changes. During past economic downturns, too. During the 2008 financial crisis, several corporations that got government bailouts gave their executives huge bonuses, which raised a public furor. There's nothing like that during this crisis, says Ms. Gorte at Impacts. In fact, some corporate CEOs have gone out of their way to emphasize that they're trimming or even eliminating their pay for the year. Still, a controversy this year involves participation in emergency federal loans for small firms, which are forgivable if used to keep workers employed. The program's rules were loose enough that some large publicly traded companies managed to qualify for the program, partially draining it of the cash. When they faced the glare of media headlines, several returned the money. Another prod for corporations is the prospect of legislative efforts to address the treatment of workers or income inequality. The crisis has added to hopes on the political left that ideas like higher minimum wage, universal health care, or even a universal basic income could gain political traction. Whether through political leverage or investor and consumer activism, some experts say the social forces that guide corporate behavior are already shifting, if slowly. We already are at that inflection point, says Barbara Dyer, Executive Director of the Good Companies, Good Jobs Initiatives at the Sloan School of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. We've known, for example, that the policies and laws that shape our employment and labor systems are antiquated. They came out of the New Deal, and there are many people who have been working to think about what the 21st century legal structure ought to be, and they're ready. Well, that concludes that article, leaving me with much to think about. Our next article is Grocery Store Chronicles, One Worker's Experience on the Front Lines. An editorial director turned grocery store worker in the Midwest shares what it's like right now to tend the produce aisle by Lee Dean. There's nothing like a pandemic to upset the apple cart. In October, my employer eliminated my position as an editorial director. I was declared superfluous, extraneous, expendable. A few short months later, as a grocery store produce clerk, I am now labeled essential, a soldier in the middle of the fight against a deadly virus. My colleagues and I continue to adjust as the elements of what was once considered normal are peeled away like layers of an onion. Hours have been reduced, sanitary wipes were removed from the entryways in exchange for every cart being wiped down. Bottle returns were eliminated, followed by all returns. The mechanical horse that kids could ride for a penny was taken away to its stall. As essential workers, we were each handed a letter authorizing entry to the store and a paper placard to be shown to the authorities in case they pull us over. We're sanitizing touch points every 2 hours. Masks became mandatory in late April, but many of us were already wearing them. We come into work every day thinking, what's next? So far, the most remarkable trend of customer behavior is how unremarkable it has been. This general sense of equanimity may be because our store is in the epicenter of Midwestern nice. The shoppers, too, are adjusting to the shifting reality. Some have even gone out of their way to thank us. There are a few indications that this fabric of good feeling is beginning to fray. Our store has placed taped arrows on the floor to control foot traffic. I saw one man pushing his cart against the grain over the protests of his wife. "Don't you see the arrows? You're going against the arrows," she pleaded. The man kept on pushing his contrarian cart, head tilted at a defiant angle. Did you say kumquats or gumdrops? The use of masks increase a sense of safety, but at the expense of clear communication. It can be hard to understand customers whose speech is muffled by a layer of fabric. Did that person ask for kumquats or gumdrops? Did that person ask for zucchini or rotini? Honeycrisp or Cosmic Crisp apples? For shoppers, there are two particular areas of struggle. I feel sympathy for the conflicted souls, almost always men, armed with shopping lists. You can tell they're attempting to navigate in uncharted waters. One such gentleman wearing a mask brandished a bulbous vegetable, lavender in color with white stripes. "What kind of squash is this?" he asked. "That's an eggplant," I replied, with all the compassion I could muster. The portion of his face that I could see quickly turned crimson, which was a good color match with that eggplant. Other customers in similar situations make use of technology to help them acquire the desired item. They use their smartphone to send photos of the bananas to those back home, conferring about the preferred coloration, whether deeper green or yellow with black spots. The other area of struggle, the thin plastic bags that customers can tear off from a roll and use for bulk items like potatoes. Under the circumstances, no one dares to use the tried and true method for opening them, which involves licking an index finger and a thumb. Now they rub and rub the top of the bag until either it opens or they toss it aside in disgust. Pro tip: the way around this problem is to head for the wet rack, where the leafy greens are displayed, and wait for the mister to turn on. When it does, wet your fingers and then open the plastic bag. There's anger over missing sanitary wipes. There have been a few tense moments. One Saturday, my job was to be one of the workers at the front entrance, counting the number of shoppers entering the store to stay within the legal limit of customers. One man, on discovering we had removed the sanitary wipes, exploded into anger. Thus far, we have not been asked to enforce social distancing. If two people are talking in the middle of our work area, we have the right to ask them to move. But I don't have the heart to break up a conversation between two friends who haven't seen each other in weeks. Those little pieces of social cohesion are more important than whether or not I finish filling the green bean display. But some things about shopping never change. While walking back into the store from a break, I saw one man who had just left the store, stopped in his tracks. He said quite loudly, and to no one in particular, "I forgot where I parked my car." I treasure that nugget of normalcy and hang on to it as a harbinger of better days. This pandemic has been harrowing and aggravating. It has also given us unique opportunities to display the better angels in our nature. And we have done exactly that, judging by what we see in one Midwestern grocery store produce department. The vast majority of Americans are good. The mothers and fathers, the working people, the children, the vast overwhelming majority, millions and millions and millions, wrote legendary basketball and life coach John Wooden. A small percentage are otherwise. They get the attention, but we mustn't forget the tremendous good we have within us as a people. That goodness, more than any other factor, is what will carry us through to the day when the masks are gone. The mechanical horse returns, and a couple can fuss over something other than taped directional arrows on a grocery store floor. Well, my friends, that concludes the reading of the Thursday Christian Science Monitor. Thanks for being with us today. Stay safe. I'm actually considering a road trip to Bristol, Tennessee to eat in a restaurant. No, not really. Anyway, be blessed. Make it a great day, friends.